Welcome, everyone, to the Squid and Belief Fan Show, brought to you by the Hockey News. With over 2 million dedicated readers, the Hockey News is the authoritative source of hockey and the #1 publication in North America. With an ever-growing podcast network and video database on top of an already established print and digital brand, the Hockey News is there to cover all the major hockey stories from around the world. Visit thn.com/deal to get the best value on a subscription to the Hockey News. I'm Mike Wilson, the Ultimate Leafs fan, and joining me as always, my co-host, Ricky Squid Vaive. How's things going, Squid?
Fantastic, Mike. Couldn't be better. Seeing the Leafs kind of starting to, I don't know, I've moved some chess pieces around, and I think there's a lot more to come. It wouldn't surprise me if we see 6, 7 new faces in that roster next year.
Yeah, it sure seems to be shaping up that way. It's not too often you see, Jimmy Rutherford gets criticized quite a bit, but we're now without sounding too much like a homer. It sounds like, boy, oh boy, what was he thinking? I mean, really, you're giving up, Kapanen, to me, I've always been a big fan. I believe he was a 5-2-0 player, but this guy's playing in the third line. The last 3.5 years, he hasn't been able to really put it all together. Maybe a change of scenery would do him well. But boy, oh boy, giving up a first-round pick, 15th overall. You gave up a kid with a little bit of promise in Hollander, who's back in the Swiss League playing, and a couple minor leaguers, basically. One a restricted free agent. They may or may not qualify. But boy, oh boy, it's nice to be on that one end of it. And poor old Mr. Jimmy took a real beating on Twitter, that's for sure.
Well, he did, but, when you think about it, Kapanen's a pretty good player. And,
no question.
As you said, he can play a lot of different roles. But he might get a chance to play with Crosby or Malkin on the right side. And, if he gets that opportunity and they give him a real good shot on one of those lines, he could have a real good season.
Yeah.
Because he's that good a player.
He is, and maybe the change of scenery would do him well. And, we wish him all the best success going forward. I do like him as a player, but just not against Toronto, hopefully.
Yeah.
Some interesting things developing in the playoffs as we see with some unseen goals and, maybe some questionable calls on the refereeing side and maybe some the playoff disciplinarian guys, first day at the new tongue, Mike, nice talking there, on some of the penalties. But away from all of that, anything you've seen so far that stands out with any of the series?
I think the biggest surprise is Dallas. They've come out and took a 2-0 lead on Colorado. Colorado got back to 2-1, but Dallas is playing very, very well right now, and they're giving Colorado everything they can handle. And of course, Colorado, without their #1 goalie, Grubauer, and defenseman Johnson is out, so that hurts quite a bit, and that might be part of it, but at the same time, Dallas is playing real good hockey.
Well, and it's nice to see the New Jersey Devils back in the second round of the playoffs wearing New York Islander sweaters. With they dump the puck in and 5 guys sit at center ice and wait for them. It's like come on, Rover, come on over. And it's not exactly the most exciting hockey, but it seems to be winning. And here we are again. And you know what it does? It circles right back to that team at just a little south of me, at the Scotiabank Arena and Lou, and what wins and what doesn't win. So anyway, I guess we can't really criticize because he's got them winning.
Well, you got to look at some of their forwards too. Dynamic Barzal,
no
he's
question,
been unbelievable.
And Anders Lee.
I mean, but they do play that type of style. Maybe not quite the way New Jersey did, but pretty close. And then when they get opportunities, then they pounce on them, and they're playing a very good hockey right now as well. And give Barry Trotz a lot of credit for coming in there and turning all that around. And boy, oh boy, I'm sure Washington wishes they never let him go now.
What about Nashville? Everywhere he's been.
Yeah, or Nashville.
I'm telling you, at some point, coaches sometimes gets too much credit on the wins and too much blame on the losses. In this case, he's making a pretty strong, solid case for himself that he is a difference maker.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you wonder now, Todd Reardon kind of got thrown in there after Barry and didn't have any success in the playoffs. And, now they said they're going to hire a coach who's been in the NHL. I mean, Laviolette's name's come up. Bruce Boudreau's come up.
Mike Babcock.
Several other names. Mike Babcock has come up.
Gerard Gallant.
Gerard Gallant. So, I mean, likely one of those guys will get the job. And they all have coached for quite some time in the National Hockey League. So, I think that'll be a big boost for the Capitals, as McClellan, GM, said. He said, we got an older, more established team, and we need an older, more established coach. And that's what Barry Trotz was. And I agree with him. I think that's what they need.
Squid, we have a very interesting guest joining us today who played with you in Birmingham. Let's just say one of the more colorful characters that was assembled on that club, who became more famous off the ice, I would have to say, in the movie Slapshot. Of course, I'm referring to one of the Hanson brothers, Dave Hanson. Dave's son, Christian, played for the Leafs, and as a double whammy for me, played for the Fighting Irish of Notre Dame. Dave, firstly, how's things? And secondly, while on the family topics, any dinner table chirping over the alma maters?
Well, actually, when you started the intro, I thought you were going to talk about Squid. Jeez. Until you hit Slapshot. But we have some pretty good banter over the dinner table here and there. But, I'm a true fan of Notre Dame, Irish hockey, and the whole university there. And certainly when a good friend of mine, Brian Burke, called me, and then I passed the phone to Christian on our trip back after Christian got disqualified out of the playoffs with Notre Dame, and said, Berkey said, "Hey, Christian, want to sign you?" I immediately became a big fan of the Leafs, and have not stopped. So,
well, I look at the top of that shirt there, and it looks blue and white. Don't tell me there's a crest on the bottom. Oh,
there you go, buddy, right there.
Oh,
boy.
All right.
You sure know how to.
I can honestly say there's three NHL teams that I cheer for. It's the Leafs, the Pens, because I'm in Pittsburgh, obviously, and still Minnesota. Still hope St. Paul someday pulls one out of there too. They deserve it. Just like
speaking of the Penguins.
Yeah.
What did you think of that trade you just made with the Leafs?
I think here in Pittsburgh, the pundits are saying that, I think Pittsburgh got the short end of the deal. But I honestly don't know enough about the players that they all got traded to really give you an honest opinion, Squid. Other than Rosofsky, because Christian played Rosofsky, and I used to watch him play in Providence, and pretty good hockey player. But whether he's NHL material on a long-term basis, just to be seen. But he'll certainly help the Marlies.
Well, I mean I think
first-round pick too.
Yeah,
first-round pick.
He's a good hockey player.
Yeah, they gave up a lot, but in desperate times, some desperate measures have to take place. And listen, in Toronto, we're no different here, Davey. In Toronto, the team's been out a month. And on social media, there's been 23 trades, I think. There's been 2 coaches fired already. The GM's been changed. They've switched rinks, I think they're going to play at. And this all, as I said, within the last month. And they haven't played a game, okay? So we know exactly what you're going through in Pittsburgh. You're in Toronto.
Well, it's a mess. And it still boggles my mind that they fire, especially here in Pittsburgh, they fire 3 assistant coaches, instead of making some major trades and thinking it's the players. But I know Jimmy Rutherford pretty well. He's a winner, and he knows how to put championship clubs together. And I think there's better days to come here in Pittsburgh.
Yeah, I'm sure there's going to be some. Now, Dave, speaking of which, you mentioned Minnesota as one of your spots. You grew up under the legendary Miracle coach, Herbie Brooks, at the University of Minnesota, and eventually played for the North Stars for a short, brief while later in your career. Just take us through your early years of college and even leading up to that, playing hockey in Minnesota.
Well, Minnesota back in my day was really the state of hockey in the United States. All the way from the Iron Range on down, to the Twin Cities area. People in the wintertime, that's what, the land of 10,000 lakes. So that's all we did, was skate, either skate or drink beer. And I wasn't old enough to drink beer yet. So really I grew up through the high school hockey, which, almost all the kids did that played hockey, came up through those ranks. And as a true freshman at 18 years old, I was actually thinking I was heading to New Mexico to play football, which was really my primary love, even though I played hockey most of the time. And as you know, things would have it, Herb Brooks kind of came knocking on the door and invited me to become a Gopher. And there's not a kid in Minnesota that doesn't dream of playing for the Gophers, you know. And so I certainly didn't hesitate to say yes. And but as things would work out there, you know, I just wasn't ready for college hockey. And I should say, as most true freshmen aren't, unless you're really the exception. And I certainly wasn't exceptional. And I just didn't have the patience, you know, and certainly didn't have the foresight and the maturity to recognize what Herb Brooks could do for the development of a kid. So I decided to go back. Actually went back and played junior hockey for a junior league in St. Paul that was coached by another legendary Minnesota guy, Doug Woog, who went on to coach the Gophers for years and had a great career there, and won a couple national championships. And literally right out of there, instead of going back to school, I turned pro. I had Glenn Sommer.
Yep.
That's when the WHA was, you know, in its infancy, and Glenn Sommer. You know, and we know the kind of teams Glenn put together. You know, so,
well, we're going to get into that. That's for sure, because that's where Squid kind of comes into the equation at some point. So now under Herb,
one thing, Dave. Yeah. Sorry, Mike. One thing, Dave, about I've heard so much, and I played with guys from Minnesota. Okay, especially in Buffalo, Mike Ramsey, Phil Housley.
Yeah.
They talked so much about high school hockey and how great it was in Minnesota. Talk a little bit about that, because I know that like the NHL are drafted, you know, over the years have drafted guys first round picks right out of high school in Minnesota.
Yeah. Well, Phil was one of them, right? I mean, you know, Housley was one of them right out. Yeah, well, I guess one way that you know, maybe, you know, you guys in Canada would maybe equate high school hockey and going to the high school winning the high school championship is like winning the Memorial Cup championship for juniors, except you're doing it as, you know, anywhere from being a freshman in high school to a senior in high school. So that's the ages of 16, 15, 18 years old. And everybody at that time, you know, strove to get to the high school hockey tournament. They played at the old Met Center. I don't know, Squid, was the Met around when you played? Yeah. So, you know, all the games were played at the Met Center. So, you know, that's where the North Stars play. So it was kind of like playing at the Gardens, you know, for a Minnesota kid.
And they'd sell the rinks out.
Excuse me?
And they'd sell the rinks out.
Oh, yeah, that's what I was going to say. Yeah. Not only sold out, but it's televised, and it's, you know, while it's on TV, it's the highest rated television program, you know, going throughout the state. So high school was like that. And you know, the great thing about that is that you had these small towns up in northern Minnesota, you know, like Virginia, Minnesota, and Cloquet, Minnesota, and you know, some of those teams, and you know, could not, you would think, just because of the size of the towns and the size of the kids going to the school, that there's no way they're going to compete with the teams down in Edina, Minnesota, where, you know, it's a metropolis down there and you're pulling kids from all over the place, or for that matter, even out of St. Paul. But, you know, all of a sudden out of Roar Road, Minnesota, you'd have a Henry Boucher playing for a hockey team, or a Mike Antonovich playing for a team up there, or Gary Gambucci, or, you know, any of those players like that. And they'd be surrounded with just a bunch of good kids and good hockey players. They'd come down and they'd beat these big schools. And at that time, unlike now, they didn't have really classes. It was just every high school team was at the same, like in the same conference, for example, and played against each other when they got to high school tournaments. So it was really, really exciting, and it was fun. And if you were lucky enough, you got to play indoors before you hit to the Met, because I know growing up for me, I did not skate on an indoor hockey rink until I was a sophomore in high school. Up to that point, you know, our power skating drills was pulling the hose out, you know, onto the rink and flooding the rink, and then pushing the shovels up and down and take the snow off. We played outdoors. We built our own rinks. So it was really a great time to grow up. And to your point, Squid, high school hockey there was just the mecca of sports.
So when you got away from Minnesota, I mean, well, I was going to ask you two questions here. One, I just want to see if Herb Brooks, I mean, the short time you're with him, was there any sort of velocity besides the fact that you failed to realize at the time he would have had an impact on you moving forward? But is there anything he did leave with you? It could be a funny story or something that just stuck with you to this day that you kind of chuckle every time you hear his name from when you played with him?
Oh yeah, I think it was work ethic. And again, I think that's one of the things that was kind of unique then, was that Minnesota only had Minnesota kids. They did not recruit outside of the state of Minnesota. And those kids, like I said, you go up to the Iron Range. I mean, they come from blue collar families,
Mm-hmm.
and I did as well, and those guys, and so they were used to working hard, and Herb just continued to grow that, and instill that in any of his athletes. So, if you watch, the last movie with Kurt Russell, A Miracle on Ice, and they talk about, the wolves eating you up, and we had these things called Herbies, which they show in the movie where, you start at the red line, and, Squid, this because Brof used to do this to us all the time when we lost. You'd start on the red line, you go red line, red line, far blue line, red line, all the way down the red line, and then you come back and you think you're done after 15 of those, and he'd blow the whistle, keep going. So, to answer your question, Mike, it was, a work ethic. I mean, Herbie, we would run the stadium, and he was so advanced. I mean, he was the first one, or at least one of the first ones, that brought kind of the European flair over to North America and found a way to integrate it. But, we'd be running the football stadium, the Minnesota Gophers football stadium, with weighted vests on, and nobody was really doing that at that time. And once we got done with that, he'd say, okay, get to the locker room, get changed, and we go out and we do Herbies. So it was, so that's the kind of, that stuck with me in my whole career, and also just appreciating where you are in life at that point in time.
So the other thing.
By the way, before we move on, what was your position in football?
Yeah.
I was,
in high school. Linebacker?
Well, it was running back and a linebacker, yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
Good guess. Good guess. Well, what I was going to ask you, Dave, is you've kind of answered it already, but I mean, you come from a hockey crazy area, but sometimes, like us, we grew up in Toronto, we kind of take a little bit for granted, but when did it finally hit you going around the country playing pro, college, or wherever you were playing at the time, or even any lower level hockey? Did you realize, geez, Minnesota really is a special place compared to some of these other places?
Well, it's probably the first time when I left. I went to when I signed with the Minnesota Fighting Saints. We had training camp right in Minnesota, right in St. Paul.
Yeah.
The nice hotels, the good food, this and that. And then they sent me to Niagara Falls, Ontario, to finish off my minor league training camp for Johnstown Jets. And they stuck us in the Olympia Hotel. And our wake-up call was this big old German lady with a cigarette butt hanging out of her mouth. She would slide the window open because you couldn't lock the window. She'd slide the window open, put her arm through the door, open the door, come in with the vacuum cleaner, and start yelling and smoking, saying, "Time to get up." And I'm thinking, oh my God, how great is Minnesota compared to this? But then I went from there, and then I drove into Johnstown, which was like going into the bowels of hell, because I'm coming in. Johnstown sat in a valley, and we're driving in late at night, and I'm seeing through the haze of a smoke-filled valley, these flames of smoke coming out of the chimneys of the steel mills, and I'm thinking, what the heck is going on? So yeah, I'd have to say that's when I really sincerely appreciated what it's like to be back home.
Yeah, that's probably as good as one as any. Well, now that you're in, we're in the NHL in Johnstown. Obviously, became famous for Slapshot, which we're going to get to momentarily, but we want to go through some other things first because we have a listening audience, I think, that in that 35 to 50 genre that just really may not appreciate what went on in that period, including the WHA. Now, you were drafted by the Minnesota Fighting Saints, as you mentioned, in 74, 59th overall, but you didn't really get a shot at the stick for a couple of years. So let's go back at the beginning. Now, one of the things we like to do when we bring players on, such as yourself, I have this 3 sort of tier question that I ask about when a player first comes out of wherever they're playing, junior, college, or even the minors. But going to your first training camp, there's the expectations of what you're thinking for yourself and what could be in front of you. The reality, when it hits you that possibly there's 2 couple rooms full of guys just like you. And third, survival. When does that really click in that you have to do something just to stick with these guys? So I throw that over at you.
Well, I was 20 years old when I went to the Minnesota camp, and you had established NHLers and WHA players there. Mike Walton, Teddy Hanson, I think Davey Kean was there at the time, McKenzie, and a bunch of those guys. And but I was in shape, and I'm thinking I'm really doing something here because they got us running up and down the friggin' hills and the streets of St. Paul, and I'm leading. I'm one of the guys leading the pack. While John Garrett, the goalies, and Mike McMahon, and a few of those guys are kind of sitting and hiding behind the trees, having their cigarettes and letting the young buck go. And then I get on the ice and I'm running around like a man with a chicken with a head cut off, and and then you could see just the skill level there. I didn't have the skill level, but I had the physical, at least the physical mentality of banging heads with these guys and knocking them around a little bit. But, to get sent off, like go back to Niagara Falls, Ontario, at the Olympia Hotel, and I don't even know what the name of the rink was there, but it was another dungeon.
Okay, hold on.
There you go.
I live in Niagara Falls now, Dave, so be careful.
I'm sure
those places don't.
Your neck of the woods is much better than the Olympia Hotel was. Although I can tell you, I had my first Canadian beer there. They had the best beer I ever it could not compare to Ham's beer in Minnesota. Whatever I had there was great. But we go into the rink, and the trainer, a young kid there, says, okay, hey, go down to the room and pick out your sticks that you want for training camp. So again, after leaving the Saints, where all the sticks are new, I go into this little room, and I literally, the sticks I'm picking from were from 5 years to 10 years back, used sticks, and so that was kind of. But then we got
to the minors.
It was welcome to the minors.
Welcome to the minors.
I don't think you could get much lower on the rung of the ladder there. And then we get into Johnson, like I said, the trip into Johnstown, but to your point, then it was a matter of, the first couple games, really, you're 20 years old, you're naive, you don't know what to expect, even though the veterans are there and they're trying to tell you. You get out there and you're playing against these veterans from the in the Eastern Hockey League. Now it's called the North American League, but it's the same guys. And they're out there to take your head off. Yeah. And I really think it took my first fight, which was probably out of fear more than anything and out of reaction, to recognize that, hey, you know what? I can carry my own weight here. I don't need to be afraid of anybody, and let's just play the game and see where it goes.
Well, you had 249 penalty minutes your first year. So, you just sort of touched on that. Eventually you obviously gained a reputation, or your reputation probably preceded you, obviously, going into the ranks as you went along. Did you find that it switched over pretty quickly, where you went from defending yourself, looking for guys to stay established, to guys coming after you as the season wore on? Well,
and just before I get into that, I had 249 penalty minutes, but I also had a $1,000 bonus in my clause with Minnesota that if I led the team in penalty minutes, I was making $200 a week, so I'm thinking, oh man, $1,000. That's so to top that story off, the last game of the season, I'm leading the team in penalty minutes, and I'm thinking, I got this wrapped up, and Jeff Carlson goes out and gets a freaking 5 and a 10 in a gross misconduct and beats me by 1 minute. 1 friggin' minute. But, that first half of the season, I think it was the first half of the season, where you're kind of going through the teams and the lineups. And, everybody is out to establish a name and establish a place. And, and intimidation was a big part of the game back then, not only at the National Hockey League with Philly and those teams, but certainly in the minors level. The second half of the season, then, after I kind of gained a reputation and established myself, then it was kind of like, okay, let's start working on the skills. But I still had to maintain the toughness because that was part of the team and it was part of the makeup of our team that led us to a championship.
Well, how about the Carlson brothers at that time? You mentioned with the way you're getting beat up by a bet. The other brother had 239 minutes, I think. They had almost 600 minutes between the two of them.
Well, yeah, the other brother, Jack, had 239 minutes in like half a season, and then he got called up to Minnesota.
And then Steve had almost 100 minutes, and he led the team in scoring.
Yeah, well, Steve was a pretty good hockey player. He didn't have to worry too much about he had Jack on one wing, Jeff on the other wing, and me on defense. So Steve could go out and play the game because he was just a pup. He was, I think, 18 years old at the time and pretty skilled player. So he didn't have to worry about the fighting. I think he just, did 100 minutes so people didn't – I mean, you could just lace up a pair of skates and go out and do nothing but skate around all season long and rack up penalty minutes in that league. It just came along. But Steve didn't have to worry too much about fight.
So, your second year, you went to 311 minutes in penalties. So again, obviously you're established of what you're doing. The guys like Cherry and all that speak to the toughness of what was going on during their period. Could they really appreciate what you guys went through trying to survive in those leagues, or how tough it really was playing in those days?
Well, I think the only guys that can appreciate it are the guys that played in that era and certainly played at that level. On one hand, depending on where you are, the fans love it. Fans stand up and cheer twice a game, right? Or for two reasons in a game: when a goals are scored, when a fight breaks out. And Johnstown was a steel mill, coal mining town, and every guy had a can of snuff in his lip, and every girl had a can of snuff in her back pocket. That's the way it was. So and again, we were Glenn Sonmore. He had the type of team he wanted, and in the minors, that's what he built down there. So it was a tough goal. So no, to answer your question, Mike, I don't think unless you played. I don't think you can appreciate what it meant and what you had to go through to keep your head above water and not have it taken off.
That's fair enough. Now, Birmingham. Let's get to the Birmingham side of things. It was a notorious team from a number of standpoints. They did a number of different things. Now, first up, before we go any further, and I'd like your opinion on this. John Bassett Jr., in my view, was a sporting genius. He was way ahead of his time in hockey, football, tennis. There's a book out this fall on him, and I encourage all hockey fans or sports fans to read this about him. First off, what was your relationship with John F.?
John was I got to know John. I wouldn't say real well. He's an owner. Got to know him well enough because he would come in the locker room once in a while. He would meet you individually once in a while, and I found him to be soft-spoken. And to your point, very knowledgeable. He surrounded himself with good people, but he knew how to do things right. When he went into Birmingham, of course, they pulled that team out of Toronto. When he went into Birmingham, I think he kind of pulled the right people together and says, what's it going to take to make hockey successful in Birmingham? And at that time, you had the legendary coach Bear Bryant coaching the Alabama Crimson Tide football team, University of Alabama. And I think the people pretty much said, people love their football. So if you want hockey to be successful, it's got to be smash mouth hockey. And so, he listened, and that's what he built. He hired Gilles Leger and then Glenn Sonmore, and they built that kind of club there.
Well,
It's funny you mentioned that, Dave, because I remember the year I was there, and I think we averaged probably 9,000 or 10,000 a game, I think. And I remember that we had Bear Bryant at night. And, it was sold out. It was unbelievable. The building was absolutely packed because it was Bear Bryant night. And that was something that, baffled me because I wasn't used to that. I didn't know much about football down there at that point, or Bear Bryant or any of that. But I think you're absolutely right. Especially in those days, the fans love the fights and they love the goals, but they love the fights too. And it's the way it was.
Yep.
Well, I think also that now you guys had first year. You guys, by the way, totaled almost 2,200 minutes in penalties. So I just did a little math and I couldn't do it in my head, but that's almost 27 minutes a game in penalties. So I want to ask you this, Dave. Now, the penalty killers, were they the highest paid players on the team?
They were just the most overworked players on it.
So I bet the other thing you got to remind people, again, it's that 35 to 50 genre that don't appreciate this. You guys had 4 guys in that club that had over 200 minutes in penalties each. You had some characters with Durbano and Boudreau and some of the other guys. First off, speak to those guys. Before you do, I want to remind people also that you also had players like Ken Linsman, Mark Napier, Paul Henderson, Frank Mahovlich, Ron Langway, Vlaslav Nedomansky. So this was not just roller derby on ice, although sometimes it probably felt like that.
Well, and I think that's, guys like Paul, used to probably complain to the coach, come on, coach, geez, put these guys on the bench for a while so we can play some hockey. But no, we had a very good hockey team, and just Nedomansky, you mentioned his name.
Yes.
Ned was on the team before I got there because actually a story behind that is Durbano and I were with Detroit. Nedomansky and Tim Sheehy were with Birmingham, and we were the first interleague trade between the NHL and the WHA. So Detroit traded us for those guys. And so, of course, Ned went on to a Hall of Fame career. And what did Durbano and Hanson do? I don't know what the hell they did.
So, well, now how about any memorable games from that season, the first year you played with Birmingham with your group, that you just look back now and you just kind of shake your head and said, boy, oh boy, that was just absolutely bizarre.
Well, there's actually too many probably to talk about in the time frame of this show, but. When I showed up, like in fact, I don't even remember Durbano in training camp at Detroit, so he may have been there, but he certainly wasn't there doing the kind of stuff that he was notorious for doing. But I can remember the first time I met Durbano in the locker room. It was actually before a game, and he's in the back room in the stick room, and he's got a rasp, and he's sharpening the end of his blade. And I'm just standing there watching him, and I'm trying to think to myself, what's he doing that for? So I finally said, hey, Durbo, what are you doing that for? We were playing Hartford that night with Gordy. Gordy was on Hartford. And he says, I'm sharpening up, and I'm getting ready for the old man tonight. I'm thinking, oh, my God, what am I in for? So that was Durbo. I mean, and there was – I can honestly say I love the guy. I love playing with the guy. He was the greatest teammate. He was a gentleman anytime we're off the ice. But on the ice, you just had no idea what was going to happen next. But probably at least one of the most memorable things is the night that we were in the playoffs against the Winnipeg Jets. Mm-hmm. Now, the Winnipeg Jets could have played against any National Hockey League team at that year, and certainly could have competed as well as beat most of them, if not all of them. Because you think about the guys they had there, obvious Bobby Hall, but they had Anders Hedberg, Ulf Nielsen, Schuberg was on defense, Lindstrom.
Yeah.
I mean, oh man, could they skate and they could fly, and they had some toughness. I think that Claxton was there, and Dave Dunn, I think was his name, was there. A couple other guys, but so we played him. We got him in the first round of the playoffs, and of course, there's no way we were picked to even win a hockey game. And yet, we had a bunch of competitors and a lot of guys that had a lot of pride and were good hockey players. But, I figured, well, I'm going to take the lead. I'm going to try to set the tone, and I'm just going to go after Bobby. First shot I get, I'm going to step into him, knock him on his ass, and all the guys are going to, raise their eyebrows, and we're going to be in this thing. So the opportunity came. I stepped into Bobby. Bobby knocked me on my ass. And if I recall right, probably went in and scored a goal. So, I put my stick between my legs and scooted off to the bench and sat there like a whipped dog for, 30 seconds, and then got pissed off and said, well, that's not going to happen again. So there's an opportunity later in the game, and this was actually after Durbo got thrown out for some incident. So there was another opportunity in the game. So I stepped into Bobby, and I might have got my elbows up a little high. I don't really recall, but all of a sudden Bobby and I got our gloves off, and we're fighting. We're throwing punches. And as we're going at it, the Winnipeg crowd is screaming, and everybody else back then, they dropped the gloves and they paired up. And we're going at it, and all of a sudden, we stop. And I don't know why we stop. But when we stop, I'm looking right at Bobby, and he's looking at me, and I'm looking at Bobby, and I'm thinking to myself, oh, my God, something looks really different. And I looked down on my hand, and God forbid, I realized I got Bobby Hall's wig in my hand. I ripped his friggin' wig off his head. And I threw the wig away, and I'm going, geez. So I get 2 minutes for elbowing and a 5-minute major. Bobby doesn't get anything. Bobby goes in, grabs a Joffrey helmet, comes back out, and continues to play the game.
Yeah.
Later in the game, I'm up at a face-off, line up against Bobby. I was playing wing then. And I said, geez, Bobby, I'm really sorry. I didn't know. He said, kid. And if you ever heard Bobby talk, right? I mean, it's still the same to this day. Kid, don't worry about it. I need to get a new one anyhow. But I think, I could be wrong, but I think we might have beat him that night.
Yeah.
In fact, on a side note, after they eliminated us from the first round, they went on and went undefeated to win the AFCO Cup. No other team in the rest of the playoffs beat them. But just to finish the story up here, so at the end of the game, we go out. I think Garrett might have been in net for us. I'm skating off, and the legendary Bill Friday was the official. And I skate up to Bill, and I said, Bill, why don't you throw me out of the game? He says, for what? I says, for pulling hair, for pulling Bobby's hair. I said, it's a gross misconduct, right? Hair pulling, throw him out of the game. He says, are you kidding me? He says, if it was real hair, I might have called it, but that isn't hair. It's a rug. So the memory doesn't end there, Mike. So, like I said earlier in the game, Durble gets thrown out, right?
Yeah.
So Durble's in the street clothes. We're all in the locker room. We're in the showers. And I don't know if Squid, I don't know if the old arena, if we played in the old arena, but if you remember, the bus would come down underneath the arena by the locker rooms, and that's where it would sit and wait. But it was also an exit for the fans. The fans could come down that way. So all of a sudden, we're all in the shower. Sonmore comes running in. He says, guys, he says, they're after Durble. They're kicking the crap out of Durble. And we go, what? And he says, guys, get out there. So you got Frankie Beat and me, Serge Baudouin, and a bunch of us. We're all running out bare-ass naked with our dinks wiggling here and there. And we go out in the crowd, and we're fighting bare-ass naked against all these fans. So it was – so that's one of the most memorable, events of my life in the WHA.
That one's pretty tough to top, I would say.
Yeah.
Well, now we get into the following year. Somner's out. Brophy comes in. A little roster adjustment, and all of a sudden, I think you know where I'm going with this one. 8 19-year-olds get brought in from junior in Canada and across the country, and one 18-year-old, and Michel Goulet, and one of them happened to be the guy in the other part of the show with me. You're sitting there now. It's a little bit of a veteran for a number of years, Dave, and you're sitting thinking, all right, what went through your mind right off the bat? What are we doing with these kids now?
Well, again, there's the genius of Bassett, right?
Yeah.
I mean, who obviously had the foresight to see something was going on, and to to pull those kids out of junior at that age, and just that crop that came in there, how brilliant is that, right? Yep. So I actually think, if I recall, I think again I started out in Detroit that year, and I don't know what happened with I'm trying to think back there, Squid. Maybe you remember, but I don't think Beaton was there any longer. Bilodeau was there any longer. Yeah. So Brof, who I played for in the minors before that, Brof found a way to get me back to Birmingham. So yeah, so I come into this group with a bunch of pimply ass kids. And Brof pulls me right away. He pulls me aside and he says, Dave, you got to be the straw that stirs the drink for us, he says, because, these kids, they're good, but they're green, and it's going to take them a while. And I'm afraid that, these guys like Semenko and Claxton and Baxter and Brackenbury and these guys are just going to eat them up. And so, we need you here, and you need to be willing to, to do your job, step it up. And what am I going to say? No, bro, send me back. So, I said, yeah, fine. And that's how it started out, but I got to honestly say, they were an eager group, and certainly in practices when I first got on the ice with those guys, you could see the raw talent, just, it was just exuberant. So it was a fun group, the excitement was there. But you mentioned Michel's Goulet's name. The little funny story I got there. So early on, Bro pulls me aside in the training room. He says, listen, he says, you got to teach this kid how to fight. He says, otherwise they're just going to eat him up. So we had a punching bag in the back room, a heavy bag and a speed bag. And he says, so, take him in the back room. I said, seriously? He says, yeah. He says, So, back then, I don't think Michelle and Squid made me better, but I don't think he spoke any English.
No, very little, very little. Yeah.
So he probably had no idea. So I take him back to the heavy bag, and I'm showing him. I said, okay, here, do this, do that. So he's hitting the bag, and he's trying to do this, and it's kind of like, almost like baseball slap happy fights, right? And so we're in there for about 5-10 minutes maybe. And I said, okay, that's enough. And I walk out. I find Brof. I says, Brof, I says, forget it. It'll be a lot easier if I just protect him. I says, let him go out, score goals. I'll protect. Anybody goes after him, I'll go out, take care of it. And it certainly worked out pretty well for for Goulet, right?
Goulet, yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, so Ricky, here's where you come in. Now, how about the kid here? He led the team in scoring and in penalty minutes. He took your job from you there, Davey.
Yeah, well, it's funny.
No.
Well, you talk about Linsman.
I'm teasing, by the way.
I was thinking about, I don't know how it popped into my head, but, when you mentioned Linsman, I played on Linsman's line, and Linsman made a career out of it. A great hockey player, but what an agitator.
He wasn't called the Rat for nothing.
Oh, and I actually grabbed him one time. I mean, and I tell Kenny this when I see him. I said, remember time I grabbed you in the bathroom when I threw up against the wall, and I says, you got to knock that crap off. I says, I'm getting tired. I said, I don't get to play anymore. I get out there and you stir, and then I got to fight for you. I said, I'd like to play. My hands are getting sore. My head's getting sore. He'd go, what? And he said, okay, and then of course he wouldn't change, And I think back to Ricky. I mean, Ricky was like that. Ricky was the same way. He was agitating. He was yapping. He was sticking you. The difference is Ricky would drop his gloves though, and he would go toe to toe with anybody. He wasn't. I wouldn't say he wasn't afraid. Maybe that's why he would go at it, but he stood up. He stood up. I never had to stand up for him for fear of him not being able to stand up for himself. But he deserved it, and obviously went on to have a great career doing the whole thing through his whole career.
Well, it's funny because a lot of people talk about Brof and some of his mundane ways of doing things when he came to Toronto and so on, but he was the guy that sat me down and said, listen, kid, so we don't have the same guys that were here last year to protect you. And, we have a couple of guys, but, if you don't stand up for yourself, they're going to run you right out of the professional hockey. And I already was a bit of a agitator, as you said, anyway, and didn't mind fighting. But it just kind of reconfirmed for me that, okay, I'm going to go out and I'm not going to take any shit. And eventually, by doing that, guys got tired of breaking their hands on my helmets and stuff like that. And they gave me a little bit more room. So, you know what, I did what I had to do. And eventually, 3 or 4 years down the road in the National Hockey League, and Mike Nicola comes to me and says, Rick, he says, we need you on the ice. We can't afford to have you in the penalty box. And I was like, oh, thank you very much. I was like, I didn't have to fight any. Well, I did fight a bit, but I didn't have to fight as much anyway. So I was able to go out and score goals and do what I love to do. So Brof helped me with that a lot.
So I don't know, Ricky, if I ever told you the story. I mean, I'm sure. In fact, maybe you don't remember it because you got knocked out. But you remember when Gordy hit you with the elbow in Birmingham and knocked you out?
Oh yeah.
So I'm on the bench, and I don't think I've ever. If I told you this, I'm going to tell you it again because I remember it vividly. I'm on the bench, and anytime you're on the bench and Gordy's on the ice, you were hypnotized. You just watched Gordy, no matter where he was at, and he was that type of player, and I just loved the way he played. I mean, he's one guy that you're afraid of, but with me, I always played hard and tough against him, but I never cheap shotted him. I try not to cheap shot anybody, and I think he respected that because I'd go in a corner with him, and guys would end up with bloody noses and teeth knocked out because he hit him with an elbow, but I never did. I mean, he would let me hit him, he'd let me check him, but But anyhow, with regards to Ricky, so I'm watching him. Ricky's on the ice out there, and I'm watching him, and I know Rick stuck Mark earlier in the game, Mark Howell. And, and again, he does, he's a young kid, doesn't know any better. I played a year against Gordy before that. Everybody know you don't leave his kids alone. Watch the play go up ice. Ricky's turning one way. I can see Gordy watching him, turning the other way. And just as they kind of go to crisscross, bang, there goes the elbow. Knocks Vaive out flat on his back. And Gordy keeps skating up the ice. And I don't know if anybody saw it other than me. And so later in the game, I'm at the face-off across from Gordy. And I don't know how it happened, but there was this time when Gordy come up to face-off, and I'm looking at his stick, and he had just a little slight curve at the end of the stick. And I said, "Hey, Gordy, I think your stick's in the wrong hand." And he said, "Oh," and he flipped over. He says, "Thanks." So it kind of became a running joke between us. So shortly after this, after they take Rick off the ice, and I'm at a face-off against Gordy, and I'm saying, "Wow." I said, "What'd you do that for?" He says, "I had to teach the kid to keep his head up." I said, "Okay, sounds good to me, Gord."
Yeah, I would have said the same thing.
But you couldn't.
I would have said, "Yes, Mr. Howe, no problem."
Hey, so Dave, tell me, with all these rookies on the team that year, was there any initiation? And did you guys get these guys on anything? You must have had some fun with the kids.
Yeah, no, I don't remember us initiating. I think they kind of outnumbered the veterans at that time. But other than probably initiating them in the bars with those Southern Belles down there, they were stealing all the girls away from us old veterans. Those kids, they had to go with it. But, it was such a great group. Those guys, you had Ramage and Hartsburg and Ricky and Goulet and Gingras and Pat Riggins and, I don't know who else. Louis Slager. It was such a great group of kids that, it almost been, a sin to, give these guys a rookie shave, which was the traditional initiations back then.
So now, any stories?
The funny thing, as you say, I remember, I think it was my first game, and you mentioned the heavy bag in the back room, and you had to go by the coach's office and the trainer's room to get there. So I remember my first game in between periods, I was going to the trainer's room for something. Larry Ashley, God rest his soul, was a great trainer and a great guy. And I hear this noise, and I sneak in back, and there's Broth with his suit on and everything, swearing, cursing, spitting, and punching the heavy bag like crazy between periods. And I'm thinking, wow, is it pro hockey, really? But anyway, it was, and then guys, before the warm-up, sitting there, Wayne Wood and all the older guys, playing backgammon for $100 a game and stuff like that. And I'm thinking, what are these guys doing? We got to get ready for the game. You got to get your mind ready. And at least that's kind of what I did. And I couldn't fathom playing backgammon for money before a hockey game. So it was kind of weird for me, but you got used to it after a while.
Now, Dave, is there the WHA was known a little bit, I guess, some guys had talked about back in the period as a bit of a drinker's league compared to the NHL, with a lot of the free time between cities and games. And there was obviously a lot of bizarre things happening. Look at Wayne Gretzky when he moved to his new team from Indianapolis going to Edmonton. Eddie Meal had to pay for the plane ride with his credit card because the company had no credit or was in debt. Give us a couple moments that stuck out throughout your career in the WHA that you would just shake your head at that would never happen in NHL, or even a couple of stories that may have stood out for you for how guys carried on and some of the characters are in throughout the league?
Well, I go back to the Minnesota Fighting Saints. I was with that organization, I think, when they folded 3 times in 2 years or something like that. And we would be getting on an airplane. I wasn't there very long, but when I was there, nobody was getting any paychecks, and they'd all sit and talk about, well, we're getting paid today, and all of a sudden you'd have the owner, Wayne Belisle, come in and start giving everybody envelopes with cash in it, so they get through another day. So, and then the team folds, and Don Niedermeyer, you remember him, Squid, the equipment manager, was the manager up there. the team folds, and he's pulling stuff out of the equipment room and selling it out of the back of his truck to people, you know, that so he could get some money if guys wanted to get equipment and stuff. So it was, you know, that was kind of the shaky end of things there. I mean, it was just a great, fun, colorful league to play in, but boy, you just didn't know, you know, what team was going to be in business and you know, what team wasn't. But boy, it was, you know, again, you go back to like Gretzky, you know, you play against Wayne Gretzky and talk about young, pimply-faced kids and skinny kids. You know, he's just out on the ice and you're playing against him his rookie season. You don't really know him. He's out there, and then all of a sudden, you know, you realize that you lost the game 5-3, and he's got 4 goals, and you don't know it until you look at the score sheet. You know, but that, and then you get, you know, you talk about the drinking. I mean, the drinking wasn't only in between games, but the drinking was even during the games. You know, with the Fighting Saints, you know, guys like Shaky Walton would come in and he could barely move, and Niederkorn would tighten up his skates so he could get out on the ice, and then you go out and you score a friggin' hat trick, and then you come in and pop a beer and say, "Okay, boys, let's do this all over again." You know, it was quite the Wild West.
Well, that was very interesting. The first part of our 2-part feature with Dave Hanson, and boy, what a character! And you know, Squid. What your teammates, you keep pulling these guys out of the hat. You played with some real characters, but the one thing they have all in common, they're all great guys.
You know what, they are. And Dave was one of the best. He's the funny thing about Dave is when you see the movie or if you played with him the way he played, but when you see him, he's just a down-to-earth, kind of a quiet guy, and a great teammate. Like, you know, he would protect all of us. Like, he wasn't afraid to go out and take care of all of us 19 and 18-year-olds. It was he took that upon himself to make sure that he did that. And I know that we all appreciated it for sure.
Yeah, and he's just got the respect of all his teammates. You never hear a bad word said about him anywhere, and I mean, that's just fantastic. So, guys, that's the first part of the 2-part series. The second part, we're looking forward to showing you guys next week. We dive into the movie. There's some fantastic stuff coming out of the movie. We can't wait to share with you guys. So once again, we want to thank you guys. And hopefully next week when we speak to you, there'll be another Leaf trade of some sort. I'm sure there'll be a few on Twitter. That's a given. But let's see if there's anything from Mr. Kyle Dubas. And we want to thank everybody for listening. We want to thank the Hockey News for picking us up once again and sponsoring. So go to the thn.com/.com, I believe, is for Hockey News subscriptions, and that will help you out. Listen, guys, thanks for staying with us today. We'll talk to you next week.